Alright, time for another draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com also. Video presentation, something a little bit different. So there's a channel called Enfield Physics Tutor, okay, physicist type teacher, I think for 20 or 30 years. and so I think there's more to physics than just reciting book, and I think there are subjects in physics that do need discussion. The famous Veritasium has made videos about how electricity doesn't actually travel through wires. Kind of a bold statement. Professor Lewin says there can be two voltages in the same location. Kind of a bold statement. Lots of statements in physics that I don't think have been completely evidenced. You would say, in using Einstein's terminology, it's incomplete theory, mostly because the evidence is vague and missing in most cases. Now, I personally have spent a great deal of time, last 2 years, discussing with a dozen or so people, kinetic energy. And the fact that it's another one of these dualities, like wave particle, except this duality doesn't, it's even more nonsensical because it's basically saying it is two different things. It has this momentum feature and then has this kinetic energy feature. And we're supposed to think of one as some sort of thing, that they're supposed to be somehow compatible. And the simple truth is any time you convert energy from a big thing into a small thing going faster, you end up destroying momentum and creating kinetic energy, and vice versa. Anytime you go from a small thing to a big thing, you destroy the momentum. No, you destroy the kinetic energy, and you can conserve the momentum. It doesn't make any sense, so I'll use a couple of those illustrations here. So anyway, this video is called Think You Understand Newton's Second Law? Question. And the second law, as Newton wrote it out, is pretty simple. He says twice the force, twice the velocity, twice the motion. 3 times the force, 3 times the motion. I think he could go on and say 4 times the force, 4 times the motion, 5 times the force, 5 times the motion. Clearly very different than the 25 times the force to get 5 times the velocity that the kinetic energy theorem states. And this is all based on F equals ma, which they write as F equals ma, which seems kind of harmless. It's just the change in your velocity, right, the a. But the a turns out to be this squared function, so I'll just show this part of the video. So the rest of his video is fine, just basically pointing out energy in, energy out, force in, motion out. Very simple until he does this part, okay? And just, in my opinion, there's no justification for this part. This is Leibnizian mechanics. It isn't Newton's mechanics. You shouldn't describe it as Newton's second law because you're really describing Leibnizian first law.
0.5 meters per second squared.
Okay, no need to do that. Newton didn't do that. Newton didn't square the seconds. Newton didn't say seconds squared. This is not Newton's mechanics, because you're going to use this squared seconds to say there's a squared amount of velocity. You're going to square the velocity terms anytime you have a velocity, which is essentially per second. You're going to say per second squared and square the velocity. And the velocity isn't squared. Newton didn't believe in 1/2 mv squared, and he certainly didn't believe in Leibniz's mv squared, okay, as being the definition of energy. So this isn't Newton's mechanics. It's worthy of an argument. You're a physicist. You should be able to challenge and explain and justify with evidence. All right, so that's the real subject, is the absence of evidence. So I will illustrate a couple of simple scenarios where it becomes, in my opinion, apparent, okay, the problem becomes apparent. So, the simplest one is this simplest one, okay, where you have the simple experiment where you take a one mass, say going a 2 velocity, all right, and you add to it, you just add a dead one mass with a 0 velocity, and you end up with a 2 mass, okay, perfectly conservative, going 1 velocity. All right, this simple experiment conserves, in the cases where it's done, I've seen them conserve 99% of the momentum. Okay, do it very gracefully. You conserve almost all of the momentum. You just use the tiniest, you lose the tiniest bit of velocity. Doing the experiment carefully. All right, yeah, close enough. Yeah, I should move this camera. Yeah, that would probably be the better thing to do. All right. And so the simple truth is that by the kinetic energy theory, okay, that you've lost half. 1/2 the kinetic energy is missing here. Okay, you're down 1/2 the kinetic energy. You've conserved the momentum and you've lost 50%, okay, of the kinetic energy. And the physicists don't really provide an excuse. They say things like, well, there was deformation, or there were sparks, or there was sound, or there was heat, or there was some other kind of use of the energy, the kinetic energy. And I would simply make the argument that that's impossible, that no examples in physics can you ever move something, that is, create heat, or fly a piece off, or make sound, move atmosphere, without using something's momentum. You have to use momentum to make momentum. Momentum just moves through the universe. It doesn't create and disappear. So you can't create and destroy momentum. So you can't make all of this stuff. You can't make, let's say it was 100 joules that went in. You can't make 50 joules worth of motion in other directions, going other places, and then claim I conserved all of it. I conserved all the motion. So to me it's a simple, brings up the paradox, and frankly for 2 years we've been arguing this because there isn't a satisfactory explanation provided by anybody, but physicists won't participate and explain, why do you believe this is possible? Why do you believe it's possible to destroy kinetic energy? Now, the other example I can use is the simple space example, where in space momentum rules, and there's no evidence of kinetic energy functioning. So if I did have a spaceship and I wanted to turn it in space, it doesn't matter. I can't use the smallness fact as an advantage in turning something. I can't decide to, if I throw out a kilogram out this side, or I throw out 100 grams out this side, I can't create this 100-to-1 differential. I can't gain the advantages of the high velocity. So it's, basically I could say this was 2 liters, 2 kilograms, and I'm going to have a dime fly out the other side at 1,000 miles an hour, and I'm going to have this go 1 mile per hour. And the fact is that the ship's not going to turn. I'm going to have 2 joules of energy over here, and I'm going to have 2,000 joules of energy over here. And the ship isn't going to see any of that. It's just going to see that I have the same exact MV here as I have MV over here. And that's what's going to turn the ship, is just the MV. So it can't move something in space. The fact that kinetic energy doesn't work in space. I have no advantage in shooting small objects fast versus throwing big objects slow. 1,000 atoms, okay, going 1 mile per hour is the same as 1 atom going 1,000 miles per hour. Those 2 things thrown out of the ship will equal the same thing. I won't be able to gain any advantage by releasing one versus the other. And that, to me, is a pretty obvious demonstration that it doesn't work. Now, the other thing I could just point out is that we don't have the real decisive piece of evidence. There's no car crash test. There's pretty clear ones where, they move the car at twice the velocity into a brick wall, okay, 2x the velocity, and all they get is twice the crushing. They don't get 4x the crushing. And it can be surmised that the other test would be likewise showing momentum ruling. Now, no evidence of the kinetic energy existing. All the car crash analysis is always about conserving momentum. They always just look for the crash and they just say how much momentum went in, how much MV here, how much MV here, then that's how much they can expect to get out, is that same amount of MV. They can't make free kinetic energy. Alright, so that's probably enough as a starter. So it's certainly an incomplete theory in the sense that they don't have that decisive piece of evidence. They can't show you. You can't show me as a physicist. You can't show me it taking 25 times the fuel to go 5 times as fast. You can't show kinetic energy in any dramatic way. And the only thing they have is a few air cart experiments that, obviously the dynamics of air carts can be argued. You're adding energy to the system, and that added energy can be a liability. So there's reasons to have doubts about whether those experiments are performed clinically enough to be decisive as evidence. But anyway, so it's an argument that needs to be, in my opinion, needs to take place. I mean, the simple example of the 5-ton train converted into a 10-ton train going half the speed, and the fact that you conserve all the momentum and lose half the kinetic energy is, in my opinion, a paradox beyond reasonable explanation. So anyway, the bottom line is mv squared, squared seconds, meters per second squared is not Newton's formula. It has nothing to do with Newton's mechanics. It's Leibnizian mechanics, and just as a courtesy to the dead Newton, he shouldn't be libeled with another man's theory. It shouldn't be stated that he fell for it, because he didn't. He opposed it for 40 years of his life. He opposed the theory. It's just not fair to the truth as a bottom line to say, do you think you understand Newton's second law? And you're going to pretend F equals ma is Newton's second law. What Newton wrote was that basically force equals the change in your momentum. That's all you have to do. A force has to change your momentum, and it changes it in complete proportions. Whatever the force is, that will be the change in your momentum, and the change in your momentum will be the force. And there is no squared function. So, I can only suggest that this is an interesting subject, that your participation would be appreciated, and I will in fact pay you, to make arguments. So if you want to get paid some reasonable rate for your time to make counter arguments to I have many 5-minute videos on the debatephysics.com website. Please, we need somebody who can make reasonably complete arguments, because many of the participants in this argument aren't people willing to do research. They don't even know who Leibniz was. They don't even know what he believed, and they really don't even know anything about the history of 1/2 mv squared, and yet they wish to argue. It's how authoritative it is when they don't know any of that history. So I would appreciate if you would join the conversation and provide whatever insights you can regarding, based on your knowledge and experience as a practicing teacher of physics, which you would hope would be teaching the truth and not just deceiving little kids. Yeah. All right. So anyway, I don't know how to make a more polite invitation, so this is about as good as it's going to get. If I have to do this 500 times to finally find somebody willing to, argue the arguments, and the arguments are there to be had. Again, I could argue in the 350 years of the history of this theory, it seems miraculous that no experimentalist in all of physics has decided to prove that it takes 25 times the fuel to go 5 times faster. It seems something they would have gotten around to proving. All right. So anyway, even measuring the heat of the, you know, the 10-ton, 5-ton train, 10-ton train. I mean, your theory, the theory you're defending, the interpretation of Newton. You can't even call it an interpretation. The distortion of Newton you're defending. Um, basically says if there's a tug of war between a 5-ton train going 2 miles an hour and the 10-ton train going 1 mile an hour, that somehow this one has twice the energy and wins the tug of war. You think they would have done that experiment? If this is a truth, you think that would be a pretty clear, overt way to demonstrate the truth, and yet in 350 years we don't have any decisive experiment. All right. So, decisive on the confirming side. I'd say there's lots of decisive experiments, like the car tests, crash tests. They're pretty decisive in the sense that they don't show any evidence of any squared function existing. No sign of the 4 times the energy in the crash. All right. So, enough of a video, I think. All I can do is try. Yeah, okay, to get people to be reasonable, and such, and so forth and whatnot.